Welcome back to Lady Mythos. If you are just joining me, let me catch you up, because everything tonight is built on what came before. In the first part of this story, we met Gilgamesh, the 2/3 god king of the ancient city of Uruk, a tyrant, until the gods shaped a wild man named Enkidu out of clay to be his equal, and the two became inseparable, closer than brothers. Together, they marched into the sacred cedar forest and killed its guardian, the giant Humbaba, who begged for his life. Together, they cut down the bull of heaven in the streets of the city. And for those two crimes against the gods, a sentence was passed in the halls of heaven. One of the two friends would have to die. If you have not seen part 1, there is a card for it in the corner you can tap once we are finished here. Because this is where the story turns. And it turns into something much darker. The strongest man who ever lived was about to meet the one enemy he could not fight. He had faced monsters and gods and never once lost. But there is an opponent you cannot punch, cannot outrun, cannot outsmart, and cannot bargain with. And Gilgamesh was about to declare war on it anyway. So here is the question I want you to carry with you through the whole of this story. The question that drove a king to the very edge of the world. Can a human being defeat death? Some part of you already knows the answer. But watch him try, because how he fails and what he finds instead is the reason you and I are still telling this story 4,000 years later. If you are new here, subscribe and walk these old roads with me. And I would love to know one thing in the comments before we begin. If you could stand in front of the one man who never died and ask him a single question, what would you ask? Hold that thought as we go, because it matters more than you think. Now let us go back to Uruk, to a small room where a hero is lying very still. This is where the story truly begins. Chapter 1. The Death of Enkidu. It did not come as a wound. That is the first cruel thing about it. Enkidu, who had wrestled a god's own bull and walked out of a haunted forest alive, was not struck down in battle where a warrior wants to fall. He simply woke one morning and felt wrong. A heaviness in the limbs, a fever blooming under the skin. No enemy to face, no blow to answer, just a slow sickness sent quietly down from heaven, and both friends understood at once what it meant. The sentence had come for him. The gods had chosen. For 12 days he lay there, and the sickness deepened. And Enkidu did something that will break your heart if you let it. He began to curse. Burning with fever and fear, he cursed the trapper who had first found him at the watering hole all those years ago. He cursed Shamat, the woman who had tamed him, who had taken the wild thing he was and made him a man. If they had never touched me, he raged, I would still be running free with the gazelles, and I would never have known this room, this fever, this death. Everything good that had happened to him now looked like the road that led to this bed. And then, the old songs say, a voice answered him. The sun god Shamash, who had watched over the two friends all along, spoke to the dying man. And gently, he corrected him, Think again, Enkidu. Without shamat, you would never have tasted bread, or felt fine cloth against your skin, or drunk cool beer by a fire. You would never have walked into a great city. And you would never have known Gilgamesh, the friend who loves you like his own soul, who will mourn you as no man has ever been mourned. Would you truly trade all of that away? And Enkidu, lying there, understood. He took back every curse, and with the breath he had left, he blessed Shamat instead. It is one of the most human moments in all of ancient literature. A man at the very end, deciding that a short life full of love was worth the pain of losing it. But the fever brought something else with it. A dream. And this dream terrified Gilgamesh more than any monster ever had. Enkidu described a dark figure that came and seized him and led him down into a place beneath the world. A house that everyone who enters must stay in forever. A house of dust and silence, where there is no light, where the dead crouch in the darkness, clothed like birds in coats of feathers, eating clay, drinking dust. And in that house, he saw them, the ones who had been kings on earth, the great priests and rulers, now nothing, now servants in the dark. This was the afterlife the Mesopotamians feared. Not fire, not judgment, just an endless grey nothing. And this, Enkidu whispered, is where I am going. Then, on the 12th day, he grew quiet. Gilgamesh sat beside him and laid a hand on his friend's chest, and he felt the great heart that had matched his own beating slower and slower, and then not at all. The wild man made from clay was gone. The one person in all the world who had ever been his equal, the friend the gods had built just for him, had slipped away under his hand while he could do nothing at all, to hold him back. And here is where the king who feared nothing did something that tells you everything about the size of his love. He refused to believe it. He would not let them come for the body. He would not hear the word death spoken in that room. Surely, he told himself, this is only sleep. Surely Enkidu will wake. He would sit here, and he would wait, and his friend would open his eyes. He would not bury him. Not yet. Not ever. Chapter 2. A king undone by grief. So the vigil began. Gilgamesh sat by the body, and he waited for it to wake. A day passed, then another. The palace of Uruk went utterly silent around him, the servants moving on tiptoe, the whole city holding its breath, because the king would let no one near. He talked to Enkidu as though he were only resting. He covered his friend's face, the way a groom lifts the veil of a bride, tenderly, certain it was temporary. He paced. He wept. He tore at his own hair and his fine clothes, and still he waited for the miracle that was not going to come. But the body does not wait with us. Slowly, terribly, it began to change, and Gilgamesh watched it happen and still would not look away. He clung to the shape of his friend as the shape began to fail, as the stillness deepened into something no love could talk its way out of. And then came the moment. The old poem gives us one small, unbearable image, and it is the hinge the whole rest of the story swings on. As Gilgamesh held his friend, a maggot fell from the still body. One tiny, squirming thing, dropping into the light. And the king recoiled. In that instant, the spell of denial shattered, and the truth he had been holding off with both hands came crashing in. His friend was not sleeping. His friend was gone. Truly gone, passing into that house of dust from the dream, and no strength on earth, not even the strength of a man 2/3 God, could reach in and pull him back. But the horror did not stop there. Because looking at what was happening to Enkidu, Gilgamesh saw something worse. He saw himself. This, he understood, is not just what happened to my friend. This is what waits for me. One day, my limbs will fail, and my heart will stop, and this same slow ruin will take me too, and I will go down into that grey house and eat clay in the dark forever. The greatest king who ever lived, the conqueror of Humbaba, the slayer of the bull of heaven, was going to rot, just like any beggar in the street. And for the first time in his life, Gilgamesh was truly, completely afraid. Most men, faced with that terror, learn to live with it. They make their peace. Gilgamesh was not most men, and he did not make peace with anything. He made a decision instead, and it was the maddest decision anyone in these old stories ever makes. He would not accept death. He would defeat it. Somewhere out there, he had heard, was a single human being who had lived through the end of the world and been granted life without end. One man who had cheated death and never died. If such a man existed, Gilgamesh would find him and wring the secret out of him, whatever it cost, however far he had to walk. Even if he had to walk to the edge of the world. Chapter 3. Into the wild, Gilgamesh runs from death. So he left. He walked out of Uruk, out of the greatest city on earth, away from his throne and his palace and his shining walls, and he did not look back. And as he went, he stripped it all off. The royal robes, the gold, the marks of the king. He cast them aside. In their place, he pulled on the rough skins of animals he killed on the road, and he let his hair grow long and matted, and his beard grow wild, and the grime of the wilderness settle into his skin. Out on the empty steppe, he became something the world had not seen since the story began. A huge, filthy figure in a lion's pelt, sleeping on bare ground under the cold stars, hunting to eat, prowling the lonely places, haunted through the long nights by the roar of lions and the fear of his own dreams. The most magnificent man alive had turned himself into a wretch. Grief had hollowed him out, and terror had driven him into the wild. And if that image feels familiar to you, it should, because there is a terrible poetry in it that the ancient poets built on purpose. Do you remember how this whole story began? With a wild man, covered in hair, living among the animals on this very steppe, until a king reached out and pulled him into the world of people. That wild man was Enkidu, and now Gilgamesh, the king who tamed him, has become him. He has walked backward down the road his friend once walked forward. The griever has turned into the ghost of the one he grieves. Two ends of the same story, closing like a circle. He was chasing a name he had heard in the oldest tales. Utnapishtim, a man who lived at the very edge of everything, beyond the mountains, beyond the sea, in a place no living person was meant to reach. The one survivor of a great and terrible flood. The one human being the gods had ever made deathless. If anyone in all of creation knew how to escape the grave, it was him. So Gilgamesh set his face toward the sunrise, toward the far rim of the world. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked, until one day, on the furthest horizon he had ever seen, the land itself rose up in front of him into two enormous mountain peaks. Twin summits so tall they seemed to hold up the very roof of the sky, with a narrow gate of darkness between them, where the sun was said to rise and set. This was the doorway out of the mortal world. And as Gilgamesh came closer, he saw that the gate was not empty. Something was standing guard between those peaks. Something that was not a man. Chapter 4. Mount Mashu and the Scorpion Guardians. The mountain was called Mashu, and it was the gate of the sun, the place where the great light climbed out of the underworld each dawn and sank back into it each dusk. No ordinary place, a seam in the edge of the world, and the things that guarded it were the stuff of nightmares made watchmen. They were the Scorpion people, towering beyond the size of any man, human from the chest up and monstrous below, with the armoured bodies and curling poison-tipped tails of enormous scorpions. Their presence alone was said to be death, their gaze so terrible that to look on them full in the face was to be unmade. They stood on either side of the gate, and they had turned back everything that had ever tried to pass. When Gilgamesh approached, one of them looked at this ragged, wild, exhausted figure and saw, beneath the filth and the animal skins, something that was not entirely mortal. "Who are you?" it demanded, "that comes to the mountain no human being has ever crossed?" Gilgamesh told them. He told them of Enkidu, of the death that had broken him, of the terror that drove him, of the immortal man he was determined to find. And something in his grief, or in the divine blood in his veins, moved the guardians to do what they had never done. They warned him first. "The road ahead runs through the mountain itself," they said. "Through the tunnel the sun travels at night. It is 12 leagues of total darkness. No light, no dawn behind you, and none ahead. Not one traveller has ever gone in and come out the other side. You will be swallowed by the dark. But if you are truly set on this, then go." And they opened the gate. Gilgamesh stepped into the tunnel, and the blackness closed over him like water. This was not the darkness of a moonless night. This was the absolute dark of a place the sun only passes through at speed. And he was racing it, running through the belly of the mountain, trying to reach the far side before the sun came roaring down the same passage behind him and burned him to nothing. Hour after hour he ran blind. No wall to guide him, no glimmer ahead. The cold pressing in, his own breath the only sound, certain with every step that he had lost, that he would die here, in the dark, under the mountain. And then, ahead of him, the faintest grey, then colour, then light, real light, and he burst out of the tunnel, gasping into the open air, and stopped dead at what he saw. A garden. But a garden unlike anything in the mortal world. Here the trees did not grow leaves and fruit. They grew jewels. Carnelian hung ripe on the branches. Lapis lazuli sprouted in leaves of deep blue. Gems glittered where blossoms should be. A whole shimmering orchard of precious stone glowing at the edge of the sea. He had crossed out of the world of men entirely. And there, far across that strange shore, a single small light was burning. A light where no light should be. Someone was living out here, at the very end of everything. Chapter 5. Siduri's warning at the edge of the world. The light came from a tavern. Truly, of all the things to find at the edge of the world, an alehouse. It was kept by a woman named Siduri, a wise brewer and tavern keeper who lived alone there, where the land ran out into the waters, serving whatever strange travellers the end of the world sent her way. And when she looked up and saw what was coming toward her out of the jewelled garden, she was afraid, because what she saw did not look like a grieving king. It looked like a killer. A huge, wild man in filthy animal skins, gaunt and hollow-eyed, his face burned and scarred by his journey. She did the sensible thing. She went inside, and she barred the door, and she climbed up onto her own roof to watch this dangerous stranger from a safe distance. But Gilgamesh called up to her and told her who he was, and told her why he had come. And slowly, her fear turned to pity, and she came down and let him in, and she looked at the ruin grief had made of this great man, and she tried to save him. Now here the old songs disagree, and I will not smooth it over, because the thing she may have told him is one of the most beautiful passages ever written, and I want you to have it. In the oldest version of the story, Siduri looks at this man killing himself in search of eternal life, and she gives him the truth. Gilgamesh, she says, where are you running? The life you were chasing you will never find. When the gods made human beings, they handed us death and kept eternal life for themselves. So this is what you should do. Fill your belly. Make each of your days a delight. Love the little one who holds your hand. Enjoy the company of the person who lies beside you. Dance and be glad. This, and not some deathless dream, is the lot of mankind. It is, as far as anyone can tell, the very first time in all of human writing that anyone said the words we now call carpe diem. Seize the day. You only get the one life, so live it. In the later, more famous version of the epic, her speech is trimmed away, and she simply points him onward. But the wisdom is there in the oldest telling. and it is the truest thing anyone says in the entire story. And Gilgamesh refused it. He could not hear it. To a man drowning in the fear of death, being told to enjoy his short life was no comfort at all. It was the very thing he could not bear. He did not want a good life. He wanted no ending. And so, he pushed the wisest words in the world aside and asked her the only thing he cared about. How do I get to Utnapishtim? How do I cross to the man who never died? Siduri sighed, I think, the way you sigh at someone who will not be saved from himself. And she told him, there is a way across, but it is dreadful. Beyond this shore lie the waters of death, a sea so poisonous that a single drop on bare skin means the end. No one can cross them. No one, except one man. Utnapishtim has a ferryman, or shanabi, and only his boat can make the passage. Go and find him, down on the shore, if he will even take you. But be warned, Gilgamesh. The waters you are about to cross do not forgive a single touch. Chapter 6. Crossing the Waters of Death. He found the ferryman down among the trees by the water, and this is where Gilgamesh's own worst enemy showed itself again. The temper that had never once served him well. Working there beside the boat were strange things the old songs call the Stone Ones, mysterious stone figures, charms or beings that somehow let the vessel cross the deadly sea in safety. And Gilgamesh, wild with grief and impatience, not understanding what they were, fell on them in a rage and smashed them to pieces before anyone could stop him. It was a disaster. In a few furious moments, he had destroyed the very thing that made the crossing possible. Ushanabi the ferryman looked at what this madman had done and told him the hard truth. You have just broken the only safe way across the waters of death. Those stone ones carried the boat over untouched. Now there is only one way left, and it is going to cost you. So Gilgamesh was set to work. Ushanabi sent him into the forest to cut poles. Not a few. Hundreds of them. 300 in some tellings. Long, straight punting poles, each to be used exactly once. Here was the trick, the deadly rule of that sea. To cross without the stone ones, you had to push the boat along with a pole. And the moment that pole touched the poisoned water, it was ruined, and you had to let it go and take up a fresh one, never once letting the water touch your hand. So out they went onto the black and glassy waters of death. The ferryman steering, and the exhausted king punting them forward, one pole at a time. Thrusting, releasing, seizing the next, thrusting, releasing. A desperate hand-over-hand crawl across a sea that would kill him at a single splash. 300 poles, spent one by one, until they were gone. And when the last pole was used, when the far shore was finally rising ahead of them, Gilgamesh did the only thing left. He stripped off his garment and held it up on his arms as a sail and let the wind carry the little boat the last stretch of the way. He had crossed the uncrossable. He had done what no living man had ever done. He stepped onto the shore at the very edge of creation, the place beyond death itself, where the one immortal human being lived. And there, waiting for him, was the great Utnapishtim, the man who had outlived the end of the world, the survivor of the flood, the deathless one. And Gilgamesh looked at him, this legend he had crossed the whole earth to reach, and felt something he had not expected, something close to anger. Because the immortal was just an old man, ordinary, weathered and quiet and unremarkable, sitting at the edge of the sea. He looked exactly like anyone's grandfather. This, thought Gilgamesh, staring, this is the man who defeated death? How? How on earth did someone so ordinary do the one thing I cannot? Chapter 7. Utnapishtim and the Great Flood. Utnapishtim looked at the wild, wrecked, desperate young hero in front of him, and instead of a secret, he gave him a story. "Sit," he said. "Let me tell you how I came to be the way I am." And what he told is the oldest version of a story you already know, though you may not realize it yet. Listen closely. Long ago, Utnapishtim said, humanity had grown numerous and loud. Cities swarmed, people multiplied and multiplied, until the noise of them, the endless clamor of human life, rose up to heaven and disturbed the rest of the great gods. And the mightiest of them, in his irritation and his fury, made a terrible decision. He would wipe the slate clean. He would send a flood to drown every living thing on the face of the earth. And the gods swore an oath among themselves to keep the plan secret, so that not one human being would be warned. Mankind would simply be erased. But one god would not go along with it. Ea, the clever one, the god of wisdom and fresh water, could not bear to see all of humanity destroyed. He had sworn the oath not to tell any human, so he found a way around it. He came to the reed wall of Utnapishtim's house at night, and he did not speak to the man. He spoke to the wall, and let the man happen to overhear. Reed wall, listen. Man of Sharupak, tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon your possessions and save your life. Take up into the boat the seed of every living thing. A great flood is coming to end the world. And Utnapishtim, listening in the dark, understood exactly what he had to do. He built it, an enormous vessel, sealed tight with pitch, and into it he brought his family and craftsmen, and the beasts of the field and the creatures of the wild, the seed of all living things, 2 by 2, into the dark of the hold. And then he sealed the door. And the storm came, and it was worse than even the gods had imagined. The sky turned black in the middle of the day. A wind and a rain and a fury rose up that tore the world apart, and the water climbed and climbed and swallowed the mountains. And here is the detail that has always chilled me to the bone. The gods themselves grew afraid of what they had unleashed. The old song says, the great gods cowered like dogs, crouching against the wall of heaven, and the goddess, who had helped set it in motion, wept and cried out in grief at the sight of her people filling the sea like fish. The ones who sent the flood were terrified of their own flood. That is how total it was. For 6 days and 7 nights it raged, and then, on the 7th day, it stopped. And there was a silence you cannot imagine. Utnapishtim opened a hatch and looked out on a drowned and flattened world, water to every horizon, and all of humanity turned to clay, and he wept. His boat had come to rest, grounded on the peak of a single mountain rising above the waters. And to find out whether the flood was ending, he did something that will sound very familiar. He sent out a dove. The dove flew and found no place to land, and came back. He waited and sent out a swallow. The swallow too found nowhere to rest and returned. He waited again and sent out a raven. And the raven did not come back. It had found dry land at last. The waters were going down. When at last he came out onto the mountain, Utnapishtim made an offering to the gods, and they came to it starving. The old song says the gods gathered like flies around the sacrifice, because with all of humanity drowned, there had been no one left to feed them. And they had learned, too late, that they needed the very people they had destroyed. And when the mightiest god arrived and saw that a single family had survived, his fury blazed up again, until Ea shamed him. Was it right, Ea asked, to drown a whole world for the noise of it? And something in heaven relented. As a kind of peace, as a reconciliation, the gods took Utnapishtim and his wife and granted them the one thing no other humans would ever have. They made them immortal and set them here, at the edge of the world, to live forever, apart. Then Utnapishtim leaned toward Gilgamesh, and he let the hard truth land. "Do you see," he said, "my deathlessness was not a prize I won. It was a single, unrepeatable act, the whole assembly of the gods gathered in one impossible moment after the end of the world. There is no such council coming for you. No flood, no gathering of the gods, no vote in heaven to make Gilgamesh immortal. And I should tell you, the older songs give the survivor of that flood other names too. Atrahasis in one telling, Ziusudra in another. The same man and the same drowned world, remembered a little differently in every temple. But the lesson does not change. So if you truly think you can conquer death, the old man said, then let us start with something smaller. Let us see if you can conquer sleep. Stay awake, Gilgamesh. 6 days and 7 nights. Do that, and perhaps we can talk about forever. Chapter 8. The Test of Sleep and the 7 Loaves. It sounded so easy. Stay awake. For a man who had crossed the waters of death and run through the tunnel of the sun, what was a week without sleep? Gilgamesh settled himself to keep the vigil, proud and certain, ready to prove himself against death itself. And almost the moment he sat down, he fell asleep. The exhaustion of the longest journey any human had ever taken rolled over him like a wave, and he was gone, slumped and snoring, before he had lasted even a single night. He who had come to defeat death could not stay awake for one evening. Utnapishtim looked at the sleeping hero and turned to his wife with something between pity and grim humour. "Look at him," he said. "The man who wants to live forever, and he cannot even fight off sleep." But he knew that when Gilgamesh woke, he would deny it. He would swear he had only shut his eyes for a moment. So the old man's wife devised a quiet, devastating proof. Each day that Gilgamesh slept, she baked a single loaf of bread, and she set it in a row beside his head. One loaf for each day. And she let him sleep. 6 days and 7 nights he slept, the exact span he had sworn to stay awake through. And when at last Utnapishtim shook him and he startled up, Gilgamesh said exactly what the old man knew he would. "I only dozed off for a second." And Utnapishtim pointed, without a word, to the loaves beside his head. "Look, count them." The first loaf, from the first day, was hard as stone and green with mould, gone to ruin. The next was dried and cracked, the next stale, and so on down the line, each a little fresher, until the last, from that very day, still lay soft and warm. 7 loaves, 7 days. There was no arguing with bread. He had slept the whole test away and never known it. And in that small, quiet, almost embarrassing moment, something in Gilgamesh finally broke and finally understood. If I cannot conquer sleep, this little cousin of death that takes me every single night, then how in the world was I ever going to conquer death itself? The quest was over. He had failed. There was no secret, no trick, no reward waiting at the end of the road for the strongest man alive. Utnapishtim had his servants wash the filth of the long journey from Gilgamesh's body and clothe him again in clean robes fit for the king he was, and made him ready to go home. Home, across the deadly sea, with empty hands and a broken heart, to a city and a life that would still, one day, end. That was all. That was the answer. Nothing. But as the beaten king turned to leave, Utnapishtim's wife looked at him and could not let him go with nothing at all. She spoke quietly to her husband. "He came so far," she said. "He suffered so much to get here. Will you truly send him away with empty hands?" And the old man, moved, called Gilgamesh back. "Wait," he said. "There is one more thing. A secret I have never told a living soul. It will not make you immortal, but hidden at the very bottom of the sea, there grows a certain plant." Chapter 9. The Serpent and the Plant of Youth. "There is a flower," Utnapishtim said, "that grows on the floor of the great deep. A plant with thorns like a rose that will prick your hands when you seize it. Its name means something like, 'The old man becomes a young man.' It cannot make you live forever, but whoever eats of it is made young again. Take that from age, from a worn-out body, and you begin once more." It was not the immortality he had crossed the world for. but it was something. It was hope. Gilgamesh did not hesitate. He went out to the deepest water and he did a clever, desperate thing. He tied heavy stones to his feet the way a diver weights himself, and he let them drag him straight down through the dark water to the very bottom of the sea. And there, in the cold and the black, he found it, the thorned plant of youth, and it tore his hands as he ripped it loose, exactly as the old man had said it would. Then he cut the stones from his feet and shot back up to the light, breaking the surface with the prize held high. He had it. After everything, after every failure, he was going home with something real in his hands. And listen to how gentle his plan was, because it tells you how much this broken king had grown. He did not gulp the plant down on the spot to make himself young. He decided to carry it all the way home to Uruk. And there, he thought, I will give a piece of it first to an old man and watch it work on him and see the years fall away. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to share it. He was going to bring the gift of second youth back to his whole people. The tyrant from the beginning of this story was gone. What was walking home was a man who had learned, the hardest way there is, what a life is worth. The road home was long, and one hot day, Gilgamesh came upon a pool of cool, clear water, and it looked like mercy itself. He set the precious plant down carefully on the bank, just for a moment, just long enough to wash the dust and the salt off his weary body. And while he bathed, something moved in the reeds. A serpent, drawn by the strange, sweet scent of the flower, glided silently out of the grass and took the plant and slipped away with it back into the earth. And as it went, the snake shed its skin. It sloughed off its old, worn body right there on the bank and slid away, gleaming and new, made young again by the plant that should have been the king's. Gilgamesh came up out of the water and saw the empty bank and the glistening cast-off skin lying where the plant had been. And he understood in a heartbeat exactly what had happened. The one prize he had left, the single thing he had to show for the longest and most terrible journey any human being had ever taken, gone, eaten by a snake, lost to one moment of tiredness and trust. And the old storytellers say, this is why, to this very day, the serpent sheds its skin and seems to be reborn, young again, over and over. The gift of renewal that a king crossed the world to win slipped at the last possible moment to a snake in the grass instead. And Gilgamesh sat down on that riverbank, and he wept, because now he truly had nothing. He lifted his eyes to the horizon, hardly able to look, and there, far ahead, rising out of the plain, were the great walls of a city. His city. Epilogue. The Walls of Uruk. What it means to live forever. He came home with empty hands. No immortality. No plant of youth. Nothing he had set out to find. And Urshanabi the ferryman, who had carried him across the waters of death and come back with him, walked beside him toward the city. And here, in the last moments of the oldest story on Earth, Gilgamesh finally answers the question that has driven this entire journey. He stops. He looks up at the walls of Uruk. And he turns to the ferryman and says, in effect, "Look. Look at this. Climb the wall and walk its length. Examine the foundation, the brickwork, the great terraces. Did I not build this? This will stand when I am gone. This is what I leave behind." And there it is. There is the answer to the question we asked at the very beginning. Can a human being defeat death? No. Gilgamesh has learned it in his bones, has crossed the whole world to learn it. Death cannot be beaten. Not by strength, not by courage, not by the blood of the gods themselves. But it can be answered. Not by living forever, but by building something, by loving someone, by leaving a mark on the world that outlasts your single, fragile life. The walls of Uruk are the answer. And do you remember where we started this whole story? At the very opening of part 1? On these same walls, glowing gold at dawn, a tyrant's proud and empty monument. They have not changed, but the man looking at them has. What began as one arrogant king's vanity has become, at the end of the road, the only kind of immortality a human being ever truly gets. Now, let me pull back and tell you why this 4,000-year-old story still matters. Because parts of it will stop you cold. That flood Utnapishtim described, the god who decides to wipe out humanity, the one righteous man warned in secret, the boat, the animals saved 2 by 2, the vessel grounding on a mountain, the birds sent out to search for land. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is, beat for beat, the story of Noah and the Ark from the Bible. Except this version was carved into clay tablets centuries before the book of Genesis was ever written. When a young scholar named George Smith first deciphered this flood tablet in a London museum in the year 1872 and realized what he was reading, that here was a flood older than the Bible's, he reportedly leapt up in front of his astonished colleagues and began tearing off his clothes in sheer excitement. He had just discovered that the world's most famous flood story was not the first. And here is the part that still gives me chills. This story, the oldest great story humanity ever wrote down, was very nearly lost forever. For close to 2,000 years, no one could read it. It lay buried in the rubble of a collapsed library in the ruins of Nineveh. The language dead, the tablets silent, the whole epic simply gone from human memory. It survived by pure luck, dug out of the dirt and slowly, painstakingly decoded only in the last century and a half. Humanity's first masterpiece was one accident away from vanishing without a trace. And when we finally read it again, we found it holding a flood older than scripture, and a truth as sharp as anything ever written. That truth, the one Siduri tried to give him in the tavern, echoes all the way down the ages. Fill your belly. Love the one who holds your hand. Be glad in your days, for this is the lot of mankind. You can hear it again, centuries later, in the book of Ecclesiastes. Eat, drink, for tomorrow we die. You can hear it in the poets of Greece and Rome. Seize the day. It began here, on a clay tablet, in the mouth of a tavern keeper, at the edge of the world. The oldest advice we have, and still the hardest to take. But if I am honest with you about what this story is really about, underneath the flood and the monsters and the quest, it is about grief. Everything Gilgamesh does in this second half, the madness, the wandering, the war on death itself, all of it grows from one thing. He lost the person he loved most in the world. Whether you read Enkidu as his dearest friend, his brother, or, as many have across the centuries, the love of his life, the point is the same, and it is achingly human. It is love that makes us afraid of death. Grief is simply love with nowhere left to go. And this ancient king, 4,000 years ago, felt it exactly as you have felt it, or one day will. And what of Gilgamesh himself, in the end? The most famous version of the epic leaves him there, quietly, at his walls, his own death never shown. But the older Sumerian songs do tell us how his story finished. They say that in time, death came for Gilgamesh too, as the gods had always promised it would, for eternal life was never his to keep. All of Uruk mourned him, and they say the great river Euphrates was parted from its bed, and the king was laid to rest in the dry riverbed beneath the water, and the river was let flow back over him, so that no one would ever disturb him. In death, he became a judge and a guardian of the very underworld he had feared so much, a keeper of the dead. Thousands of years later, a team of archaeologists even claimed to have found, near an old dried channel of the Euphrates, the outline of a tomb, just where the legend said it would be. He never did live forever. And yet, here we are, 4,000 years after he walked the earth, still speaking his name in the dark. Which is, when you think about it, the only immortality that was ever real. So that is the story of Gilgamesh, the king who went to war with death and lost, and in losing, taught us how to live. If it moved you, leave a like so more people find it. And tell me in the comments, would you have taken Siduri's advice and gone home to live? Or would you have walked to the edge of the world like he did? If you want more of this ancient world, the goddess Ishtar, who set this tragedy in motion, has her own story on this channel. And so does the great mother of monsters, Tiamat, both waiting for you in the playlist. Until then, thank you for listening. Yours, Lady Mythos.